Sisters and brothers, welcome to Afrikan Genius, the podcast promoting Pan African thought, culture, and art, cultivating a universal African mind. I am your co-host, UncleAsar ALKEBULAN.
Greetings, everybody. This is Wesley Pepper. This is episode 6. We are using a different platform this time, so just bear with us. I'm sure it'll look a bit different, but that's always a good thing. I'm pretty good, my brother. It's nice and cold in South Africa today, but it's all good. It's all good. The spirit is good. Man, I'm looking forward to talking to our guest.
All right, so today we have Francene Walker. She is a very close friend of mine. I met her when I was a very young man, with some would say a boy, nearly a boy, in 1990. And she was a co-worker, and she has been in my life. She has been a mentor and a friend, one of my greatest supporters, and has always encouraged me, even in my lowest times. So I'd like to welcome her. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you guys for welcoming me. I'm just excited to be here.
So you were well, let's start by talking about your upbringing. I know you are originally from Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, in the south of the United States, right next door to Texas, where I am now. You're from a small town, but every time I talk to you, I learn something different about you. And we're going to explore some of those things. But tell us about your upbringing, some of your influences, and some of your interests.
Well, I appreciate you asking me that. I always like to talk about that upbringing because I grew up in I was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s during the civil rights movement. And so we still were in a time of Jim Crow and a lot of segregation and negative things happening to Black people. I grew up in a very nurturing, small town environment. I grew up with what they call the silent generation parents. So unknowingly to others, that was not a terrible upbringing. In fact, it was a great upbringing. It was a time when people were embodying the many ideologies and values of Pan Africanism. That's unifying and uplifting people. And that's what was happening with us. My parents were fantastic, loving people, but it wasn't just your parents. It was everybody in the community. It was your teachers. It was all the people that you went to church with any adult was always looking out for your best interest and making sure that the community was strong because we looked out for each other. So the little town was maybe 16,000 people altogether. About 5,000 of those people were Black people, or as my father wanted to call a colored person, or a Negro. He did not want to be called Black at that time. Those people were the people who I remember as nurturers and giving and caring and hanging out and doing things with each other. So I had all the good things, the good work ethic. I had the culture. I had everything that you would want as a child growing up. And those kinds of things were not necessarily people talking to you about your history. We missed that. That was not something that was in schools. And my parents never really talked so much about any history. They probably didn't learn it as well in terms of learning African history and their background. They talked about their parents a little bit, but the silent generation did not talk about things that were, quote, negative. So there was no learning and teaching about segregation and about what that meant and about how people were treated and that sort of thing. So I look at that as maybe a little bit of the dark side, but the beauty of it was that you were educated. Education was very important. God was very important. Church was very important. These were the main institutions within the community, and they stood for something. I was listening to your podcast with Professor Hilaire when he talked about how education, to be educated, was highly sought after and respected. And it's kind of sad to me today to see that it's not looking like that way. My mother was a teacher. That's how she started out. Highly respected in the community. Principals, highly respected, because these were people who were teaching and helping others. So that's how I started out.
So at that time, you mentioned that you didn't talk a lot about African history or anything like that, any cultural issues like that. But I know from from my years of knowing one another, that you had an early interest in visiting the continent, visiting Africa. What inspired that?
I was 4 years old. My mother said I was 4. So I can't really tell you what inspired me, but it probably was the fact that my mother provided us with a lot of books and magazines and things to read. So she knew that I loved to read. She loved to read, and I probably got that from her. So I was thinking about this as I was preparing this, and it probably had something to do with something that I read or heard, because we didn't learn anything in school. And as you know, our experience with Africa was Tarzan, and that was not very positive. I don't know if Wesley even knows those TV shows. Yes, those were our experiences. Who knows at 4 years old whether that may have been the attraction, because it was very exciting. But in the meantime, that never left me. I don't know why. I don't know what, but it never left me. And as I keep growing up as a youngster, starting to open up to Afrocentric and learning and hearing little things. Every now and then you would hear something negative that happened. But the biggest thing was the fact that there was this segregation that nobody explained to you. So you were Negro or colored, and that's why you saw a colored water fountain and a white water fountain. But nobody really explained to you what that meant. You knew that it was segregation. You knew you weren't supposed to do it. So by 8 years old, I decided I was going to taste it. I think I've told UncleAsar this story. I wanted to see, because it had to be different. You're looking at a little kid who's very literal. Something had to be different about these different spaces, that they didn't look different in many cases, especially the water fountains. They were the same. And so I did try. Thankfully, I didn't make it, but I did try. And my mother only said to me, "You're going to get me in trouble." And she was very upset. And she did not talk for a long time. And that meant you don't say anything either. You're not asking any questions. You've messed up because you tried to taste the water. I only wanted to taste it because I thought it tasted like lemonade. This is the kind of thing that happens in my era in the South, that in a way was a kind of stymied Black people in many ways, but at the same time, it was a protective mechanism. You were being very protective. But that thought of growing up and learning about Africa and wanting to know where I came from, you hear people who, you ever heard people who don't, they knew they were adopted, or I just saw something about some twins. They felt like they were always missing something. And that's the way I felt. I'm always missing something. There has to be something else. There have to be people that I know. And so college was an opener for me. That's where I started to, I would say, seek earnestly. Hmm.
And I think we want to move into that period in your life. One of the things, and I mentioned earlier that, I learned something new about you every time we talk. And I remember you got a motorcycle license at like 50, some other things. And one of the things that I learned about you even before that was that you were involved with the Black Panther Party. You want to talk to us about that?
Yes. Yes. So I think it may be the wording "involved with," my involvement at that time. But once I got to college, of course, it's Europe. I went to college, Wesley, not in the small town. I went to college in what we consider in Louisiana our largest, most culturally active and diverse city, and that was in New Orleans. You probably heard of New Orleans, Louisiana. And so we had the freshman year, we actually had a course where you the student had to create what you were going to do for that whole semester, and it was wrapped around uh, African history. And so the what I chose to do was something regarding the Dahomean kingdom, because that was one of the books that we read, and I was so fascinated. So you can see, in a way, the ignorance. I had no idea of the social and political and governmental structure of these societies, that the Dahomean culture really came to power in the 18th, 19th century. I had no idea that they had kings and queens and princesses, and their whole structure was like this. So it was a very good eye opener for me. And that was fueling now more this desire to go learn about Africa. But along the way, I always say, and ASAR and I have laughed about this, I became Black because this was Black power now. We had been in the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, and we had been peaceful and, sit-ins and this kind of thing. And now this new crop of people, Angela Davis, we had our afros, we wanted something different. And I simply was trying to figure out, where do I fit? What can I do? What's my place within this? And so I did start attending Black Panther meetings. And one of the things that I tell people is that what we didn't know, because of course we didn't have the media platforms and the social media platforms like we had now. You learn things just from communicating with people. And one of the things I learned is that their whole thing was unifying the community. They were portrayed in the media as violent people. So that's all you ever saw. They're going to kill you. They're going to shoot up things and so forth. And yes, they did have guns. And UncleAsar knows that frightened me when I would go to the meetings and I would see all these guns. But they were providing breakfasts and lunches and food to children after school. They were teaching children after school. They were helping the elderly in the communities. They were making sure that people who were unhoused were housed. And all these things were going on that you didn't see. But it was a stigma on them, this whole media look. So I participated with them, and I started thinking about other things that I did. Another thing that we used to do is we used to go to see political prisoners, people who had been put in federal prison was in New Orleans, and we would go to see. Now, of course, I was 19, 20 years old, so I was seen as, I guess, a young woman who were helping these brothers because they were all men. We did not see any women, to let them know that the struggle was still going on, that they may have been in prison wrongly, but the struggle is going on. And here we have people working to do the things that you were trying to do, and now you're incarcerated. Those was two of the kind of things that stuck with me. But I don't know if I told you, UncleAsar, that I really did go a step further with the Panthers. But it was not so much them. It was kind of incentivized by them. I met two young men who had been in Vietnam. And Wesley, you might know that era in the U.S. history. These young men had come back from Vietnam with their weapons. They were in school, but we all worked together at this place that helped kids who were orphans. So I got to know them, and they decided that I needed to learn how to shoot the guns because we were preparing for the revolution. And we clearly thought that there was going to be a time when there would be like a civil war within the United States. And I can remember, and I had to look it up to make sure I was saying the right thing. I learned how to shoot a .357 Magnum pistol. This was at the time a police issue pistol. So it was a very powerful weapon. I learned how to shoot .460 Weatherby Magnum rifles and carbines. This is what they were teaching me to do. The three of us, however, of course, I was sort of I guess you say I was the tag along. They were the brains. I was the tag along, trying to figure out what to do with her life. We decided that we were going to make our community better by eradicating drugs. And I remember, and for the many decades, I never told anybody about this because it was such a big secret, is we figured out who was running these drugs that were so bad for the community. And we actually went to the person's house at some like ungodly hour, 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. I was the lookout. Now, remember, I had been trained to use this gun. I was the lookout. And they would break in the house. They broke in the house because they're thinking somebody might be there. And they were looking for drugs, and we were going to destroy the drugs. That was our plan. We weren't trying to, but I was the lookout to to shoot somebody. I wasn't going to shoot anybody. I was not a good lookout, but I was a lookout. But when I think about that experience, what I was saying is I'm willing to go this next step to make my community better. Some people may say it was misguided in a way. I didn't have to do it that way. I'm pretty sure my parents would have freaked out. But the fact that what I wanted to do was be involved in my community in a way that was meaningful. And at that time, that's what we thought was meaningful. I still think that there's a way for us to scourge some of these drugs in the community. I don't know how, but yeah, so that took me all the way through sort of college years. And then we come to grown-up years. Go ahead, ASAR.
Francine, let me ask you something that I'm gonna let Wesley get in here, but I want to ask you this real quick. When I met you, you had natural hair, and you had more natural hair, I guess, most of your life. Today in the U.S., there is, much like in the 60s and 70s with the Afro, pride in natural hair, but we see that was just a fad, if you will, a trend. And now we're thinking maybe it is something more substantial. And in South Africa, pictures and videos I've seen that women they're accustomed to wearing their natural hair, and some even go bald, and it's no big deal. But here in America, I'm not going to call any one entertainer, but Black women in this country, and I know this is a hot button issue, and that's who I am, so I'm going there with it. It seems to, still think long tresses of, bone straight hair or flipped hair, and oftentimes blonde, that's what is beauty. And I want to know, what was your experience wearing your hair natural then and now? What types of issues, were there any issues, or how did it affect you?
I can't tell if Wesley has gray hair because he has that hat on. Well, gray hair is wisdom.
I do have gray hair. I'm graying right over here. In fact, I guess the video is a bit tight. So they say. So a lot of African people believe that, and these days people flaunt their gray. They don't hide it anymore, especially men. Like, I guess 20 years ago, I'll be dyeing my hair now, and guys just wear it, like, even on their head, like it's just a natural look over here. And like you were saying earlier, and I like what you were saying with a woman having versatility in their hair, and the difference between excuse me. That's also big over here. I think since I can actually call it, say, about to the early 2000s, for sure. The whole African identity as an aesthetic is definitely more accepted, more across like races and cultural races in over here. So that's a big girl, women. It's not. In fact, it's normal to see a woman in corporate with high heels and the corporate look with big nappy hair or dreadlocks or and it's like and on the other side as well, there is on the other side there's also a huge market for the weaves, of course. That market is huge, and so I mean I want to tread carefully and not speak on the behalf of women. So I think I'll just sort of end there. But like both. And over here, a lot of women will dye their hair, and South Africa's got a real young energy to it, across all races, all economic spheres, and everything. And you can see it in the people, you can see it in the fashion, you can see it in the way people talk, and so forth. And it's actually not very rooted in African identity. It's more of a especially these kids coming up. That's got more of a Western thing. But I would say something like hair, or just embracing your skin or your Africanness, your African identity. In other words, like wearing, traditional garb. That in some quarters is okay. There was actually a story once of some Zulu guy, of some Xhosa guy, being kicked out of a mall or something because he was wearing traditional. But those are very isolated cases. They're very isolated, and I think sometimes the media blows it out of. Uh, so yeah, you can see guys with, bare feet, rastas. I think it's really, it's definitely more accepted now than it was, say, 20 30 years ago. 20, I say 20 15 years ago for sure.
Well, you made me think of something I forgot to mention is when I did finally get to go to Africa. I've never lived in Africa, which that's a little bit of envy because ASAR has lived in Africa. But I do remember we were in South Africa, and Wesley, South Africa was just something that opened me up. It was just the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. And I've told Uncle Asar several times how when we were in Sharpsville, this group of seniors were hosting us for lunch. And the woman came up to me after they had sung to us, and she took my face in her hand and she pulled me to her face. She never said anything. She did not speak English. I did not speak her language, but it was, I am you, you are me. That's what I felt. And it's still, every time I think of it, gives me chills. But one thing I did notice in South Africa that I haven't seen much here was the fact that women were using bleaching creams. So it goes back to in terms of hair and bleaching creams. And actually, I've seen videos in South Africa where they have a division of the police that actually crack down on these stores that sell these creams because first of all, they're not regulated and they are selling, things that's very harmful to your skin.
Let me actually come into, because that's a point that actually I'm quite sensitive about. Skin bleaching is a huge problem. So what makes it more acceptable is that there are celebrities that embrace it. So they are celebrated it. So I can show you a whole host. I won't call out names for obvious purposes, but I can show a whole host of women, and these are beautiful, talented sisters that were really, really, these are very beautiful sisters that as you become more popular, so your skin lightens and you can actually color check it. There's like a color code. You can see it like here in the early 2000s, and we are 2023, and you can see how it lightens. And that's for those who hush about it, but there's others who don't. In fact, there was a sister, I think, she had her name slips my mind, but she passed away recently, as in like a few years ago. She was quite also a singer, but she was also very talented with the ANC and stuff. She was one of the first celebrities to be very public, and she was actually endorsing some of these products that you're mentioning of that because these products are sold mostly on the streets, so a lot of street vendors. So there's no regulation there. Um, and they don't normally just sell skin light. There's a whole bunch of other stuff there, illicit drugs sometimes, a bunch of stuff. It's just basically a bunch of hustlers, and that's all over. That's all over South Africa. So it's very easy to get hold of. But this sister was actually like a brand ambassador of some sort for, I don't even remember the product, but it was like an orange tube. I remember an orange and a yellow tube. So it's a big thing, and because it's being seen by these popular social media influencers and such, it's just accepted. I'm actually highly disappointed on how society is accepted of it, and I'm not that critical about it. I am, but these days you got to choose your battles. So I choose, I will just shout about it on platforms like this. But like it is an unfortunate thing. And I don't actually see it going away, to be honest. In fact, I probably see it getting worse. And yeah.
Well, I am, yeah, it is disappointing to see it, but it still goes on, and it's in all cultures, especially, it's also very prominent in Asian culture, the skin bleaching, very prominent. I was, met some women from India, and I don't know, if you remember, probably 2018, 2017, maybe, the first Miss America was an Indian American born. And when I talked to these women, they were telling me how controversial it was that she was selected because she was too dark. And I said, "Are you kidding me?" And, we hosted her at our campus, and I'm looking, I said, "This woman is too dark. What do you call?" I'm looking at her. She didn't look any lighter than this woman. So I didn't want to say, "Well, what are you considered?" If do you can, because I knew she didn't consider herself dark. I wouldn't say that though, but it did come to my mind. But this young lady had been controversial in the choosing. If you're going to be the first to represent us, you shouldn't be that dark. And so I said to her, "Oh, I didn't realize that, in your culture that was so prominent." She said, "Was it prominent in your culture?" I was like, "Are you kidding me? That's always been prominent in our culture." She couldn't believe it. So just learning about each other's cultures and seeing that, and I have coworkers from all over the world now, and so we've talked about that, women in particular. That's still very common in many cultures. I don't see it as much. I just say I don't see it as much in African American culture. I don't see that as much with young people. More the hair and they love the lashes and so forth. But my 13-year-old grandson said something one day, and they let me know that this is still something that is being done in the schools, where you might tease someone because you're black, or not, you're light skinned. And I couldn't believe it. I didn't even want to accept it. It just made me feel sick to my stomach, because when are we going to get over this?
I was gonna, go on a rant about the evils of white supremacy and the European ideals of beauty, but I won't do that. What I will say is this, and I've said this publicly before, is that I love my sisters. I think Black woman is the most beautiful creature on earth, and short natural hair on a sister is like kryptonite to me. So and it just, I'll just leave it there. But yeah, we can we need to embrace our own beauty, and just like Wesley.
Everybody, we just had a bit of a technical thing there. We were using one platform, and things just didn't work out. The files are busy saving over here, but anyway, that's the trials of podcasting. These things sometimes happen. So yeah, we're back to the old faithful Zoom. As much as I give Zoom a lot of stick on my platform, like it always comes through. It always this free version is the most versatile version, and I give it a lot of stick, and rightfully so. But it always comes through, and I bet you this recording is gonna run smoothly. There, so Zoom can give me some money for that. There, I finally gave it an endorsement. But anyway, ASAR, I remember we were talking. I should have written it down. But it was around the identity.
We're talking about the privileges of being white or fair skinned in Africa.
Yeah. So it's a thing. We have a term called yellow bone, which I don't like at all. It's just thrown around. So yellow bone means that you're a light-skinned Black person, and that gives you access to women and money and good jobs and good fortune, and so it is a group of dark-skinned guys for the yellow bone. It's an insult, but some people take it as a compliment. Me, I don't personally. I don't like it, and everybody knows me says I don't like that word. Don't use that word around me, because no one has ever thrown money in my direction. So, and all that good fortune has never happened to me. So, but yeah, that's just a point to start us off.
Mm. I want to remind Uncle ASAR something you said, because it's still here in America. It may not be as outwardly, or people definitely not going to say, oh, you're white. They wouldn't say that to you, but you still see that sort of does have some privilege attached to it. And I remember you talking about our leaders, and many people feel as though that we never would have had President Obama had he been, quote, a straight Black man, or not straight, that's the wrong word, 100% Black, or both of his parents being Black. And you mentioned that when are we going to get a full Black person to be, like a top leader in the political world? It is still something that's very, very important. And I really was surprised by people's feelings. And of course, the backlash that Mrs. Obama received, because she was not, quote, a light-skinned Black woman. Now, she did not wear her, sometimes she had her hair natural, but it was always pressed or whatever, and she wore a lot of wigs and things of this nature. But just the mere fact that she was not light-skinned with this so-called curly good hair, she received negative press all around. And I think had she not been like that, she wouldn't have received it in the same way. They were going to get negative thinking anyway, but I don't think it would have been quite like that. She looked like a real Black woman, and that was offensive to people.
Let's shift, if you will. You've been to South Africa, and you've also traveled to Egypt. And the last time we spoke at length, you mentioned some things that you encountered there. You want to share those?
Yeah, I compared the two trips. You remember you and I talked about my goal was to go to all four corners of Africa, north, east, south, west. And Egypt, first of all, I did not know the history a lot, enough to, really know a lot. I should have got myself up to snuff a little bit better. So I was not expecting to see people with the thinking that they were Arab Africans. They did not necessarily embrace Egypt as Africa. And I can remember having a conversation with the tour guide. And I said, but they never referred to Egypt as African. They kept referring to it as maybe Arab. And I said, but it's in Northern Africa. It's African. Okay. You can't get around it. And so she finally said that, yes, it was, but they really were identifying more with the Arab side of it. And when you would see the same thing that you're talking about in South Africa, you see that the people who are considered entertainers or people maybe in high positions, mostly entertainers. I didn't really see a lot of political people. They were very light-skinned, very Western in their dress and their makeup and their clothes and their hair, especially the women. Although they didn't have a fondness for Americans. The thinking of American politics, they were sort of anti-American in that way, but you want to look like Americans. It's very confusing to me. You want to music like Americans, dress like Americans, eat like Americans, blah, 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 but you don't want the politics like Americans. So that was a very surprising thing, because I kept saying, where are my people? Where are the people who look like me? In reality, when we were driving along in the bus, you would see people who look like me on the streets. They were not the people who we were going to see whenever we had a stop for anything. I think I told you we went to, quote, a typical Egyptian home. That was one of the characteristics. In this home, there were over 100 of us in the home. This is a typical Egyptian home. That particular estate could accommodate over 100 people with ease. So I said, this is not typical. This can't be a typical Egyptian home. And those people were very light-skinned. In fact, the little boy that was a part of, there was a family. And the brother had his wife and a little boy who was only about 7 years old. He spoke 3 or 4 languages fluently. He was incredibly bright. He looked like he could be white if you were to see him. His father and mother, when you saw them, you could tell that they were something other than maybe white, but they were very, very fair. that part was interesting. They kept saying, well, you're going to see your people when you go to Aswan. So we went to Aswan, and there we did see some very dark-skinned people, straight hair, keen features. But what was interesting to me is that one day while on tour, our guide said to me, she pointed out a tour guide that was very dark-skinned, beautiful woman, very dark-skinned, very keen features, almost like you see sometimes in India, where you see people very dark-skinned with curly, kind of silky hair. This woman's hair was straight, silky hair. She said, we, meaning modern day Egyptians, think that that's how ancient Egyptians looked, because there were so many different sides to the whole thing. You see the statues that have huge lips, huge noses. You've seen them. When you see them up close, you can see. And I said, why would that be considered a sign of beauty? Who looked like that? Wouldn't you think somebody would have to have looked like that? Why would the big broad nose and the broad lips be considered a sign of beauty? Now, some of it may have been the fact that it was exaggerated. You exaggerate the features in the face because it means power. And, nobody can answer my question on that one. So it was still very much some issues with the light-skinned and, privilege and that kind of thing. But I think the one thing, I think you laughed when I told you that stuck with me, was the fact that the men made themselves a law that they could have temporary wives. Mm-hmm. Now that one really took me over the top, but it was a very interesting concept. It is a law, and a man can have a wife for 2 hours or for 6 months or for 3 years, because in their culture, because they're Muslim mostly, is that you have to have a wife. You can't have, technically, you're not to have affairs. You can have up to 4 wives, but you're not supposed to have these adulterous relationships. So if you can get married for 2 hours, then you're not in adultery. Now you actually have a legitimate relationship.
That might catch on in Nigeria, where some other things are going on similar to that.
I think that would catch on anywhere. It might catch on here it would catch on, because the women had in those relationships have no rights, none. They have no rights. If their children are born within this particular relationship, they do not have any rights to the children. Right. So
I also agree with that principle. I think it's only beneficial to the guy. And unfortunately, some men might take that thing a bit too far. Personally, anyway, that's just my point on that.
It was really kind of more of a sort of a class issue, because when I would ask questions about the so-called modern Egyptians were much more following a Western culture. So they pretend like they only have one wife. So this is the reason for the law, so that they could have the other, instead of just getting 4 wives like you can have within your culture. But the people who lived in the countryside had 4 wives. Technically, each wife is supposed to have the exact same thing. So you almost have to be a very wealthy person for you to marry me. I have a home and beautiful house, and you marry her. She has a home and beautiful house. That doesn't usually happen. So the people in the countryside are people who are following older traditions, or what they say non-modern. They had compounds, much like you would find in Africa and other countries, where people all lived together. So all these 4 families lived in the same compound, and they helped each other and that kind of thing. But that was seen as, according to, I'm going by our guide, that was seen as something that was old-fashioned. I'll put it like that. Not necessarily bad, but it was old-fashioned. And we as modern Egyptians don't do that. We just get married and have one wife. So once she told us this about the temporary wives, those of us, of course, American women, she made the point, you have many more options. American women have many more options for education, for jobs, and so forth and so on. So you can see that you can take care of yourself. So you get involved in a relationship and it breaks up, but you still have your job. You still can take care of your family. And we have laws that support that, which they don't. So the women, she said she named her friends why would you leave your husband knowing that he's just going to have a temporary wife that may last for 6 months, it may last for a year, and then he's never going to leave the home, you see? So it doesn't make any sense for her to leave this opulent situation, because these men tend to be wealthy who can do this kind of thing, because they know that the temporary wife is not going to last. So it's a different way of thinking, a different paradigm shift for those of us who were American women.
So over the years, Francine and I would I would tease her when she uses like a 75-cent word, and she just did paradigm. Where'd you get that word from?
That's how we met. That's how we actually became friends, through some words, right?
Right. So yeah, speaking of you, since we met working together, you followed my career, and I followed yours. And in that time, you worked for some organizations serving Black people. How were you able to, I guess, use your ideology in your work, in working with Black people?
Yeah. I think more than anything is, I think about, you asked me about being a Pan Africanist, and I don't think I ever felt like I was a Pan Africanist in the sense of my outward expressions of clothing, dress, maybe, artifacts in my home. But I think the unity and uplifting and caring and community building, I think all of those things are the tenets, just for me personally. And I am a person who absolutely loves people. So I want to know about people. I want to know about Wesley. I want to talk to him. I want to hear his stories. I want to know his dreams. This is just how I've always been. This is just Francene. But what I have learned is the working in these positions helped me to see the real infrastructure of our culture and how denigrated and marginalized and all sorts of other words our people are. And for a long time, I could maybe swallow the idea that it was socioeconomic, but it is much different from that, because when a person, the oppressor, feels like I don't like you, or I'm not going to help you simply because of the color of your skin. I don't want to know anything else about you. I don't care if you're smart. I don't care if you are rich. I don't care what. You are beneath me simply because the color of your skin. And so once I was able to, being young and whatever, able to understand that and understand that this is the way people think, I was then able to say, let me see what I can do in my community. How can I help? And through the work, I think I've always done, of course, the philanthropy piece of it. But I've learned that we have to, one thing I learned is that it sounds like you're doing a little something, but you're not. So if you help one person to move out of whatever negative situation they're in, then that's a good thing. It took me a long time to get to that. So working with people with a mental illness, who knew that my mother was going to have a brain disease and I was going to have to take care of her for 13 years. So I always feel that these experiences I've had have helped me personally as well as professionally. I went on from there to go to work with people, young people who are under the state. They're the wards of the state. So they are displaced from their homes. They can no longer live with their parents. The parents are either deceased or they're on drugs or whatever the case. They were broken. They had been sexually abused, many of them physically abused. How can you help someone like that? Well, you can be genuine, which is what I learned. But if that was a very difficult experience. And then moving to United Negro College Fund, where I didn't have as much.
You want to explain what that is?
Yeah, United Negro College Fund is a scholarship offering organization. It's not just for scholarships, but it's an education fund that supports students with scholarships and programs within the U.S. And we have a school in the British Virgin Islands. So the organization actually raises money for these schools, gives scholarships to the students, set up programs that help the students in many ways. That's what United Negro College Fund is. And I didn't have as many experiences directly with the students, but what I saw were the programs that promoted these students and got these students out of college. And these are historically Black colleges. Wesley, these are the colleges where they were started just for Black people, because Black people and white people could not go to college back in, some of them got started 150, almost 200 years ago. They could not go to school together. So actually there were quite a few wealthy white people who put together these historically Black schools, because they knew that they needed to go to school, but we don't want you to go to school with us. So let me help you build a school. And that's how they got started. But you saw, again, if you talk to anybody who went to what we call an HBCU, like I did, what did you have? You had nurturing people. You had people who treated you like you were their child. You had people who would make sure that you were excellent in everything that you did. You didn't just because you coming to a less economic school, or one that is not as expensive or as prestigious as Harvard, doesn't mean you're not to be excellent. We're excellent in everything we do. And so that has been a part of my helping me to grow and develop. And I would say that in many ways, Dillard University, which is where I went, was like that. It was small and people cared about you. The professors, you could go to the professor's home. You can't do that at maybe a big school that's got 600 people in its math class, Mm-hmm. But if you got 30 kids in the math class, you can. So all of that experience helped me to stay within helping my people and helping the community. And that's where I am now, trying to figure out what's the next step for me. New road. I got a new road to go down.
And you say that because you are retiring at the end of the month.
I am evolving.
Evolving, that's right. I'm sorry.
I am evolving. I am learning what it is to be a person 71 years old, and what is that going to mean for the next chapter of my life, and how can I help in this stage of my life? So I haven't decided to retire.
Francine, I actually have a question there, and it relates back to what you were saying earlier on about your being or attending the Black Panther. I would think from my understanding, you weren't necessarily a member, but you were involved in the organization somehow. In South Africa, we are really inspired by the likes of UWP Newton and so on, and like the ideology and, like you're saying, the soup kitchen and the help in the community. That's something that really resonates. Unfortunately, we don't have anything like this, but that's not the point I want to make. That was 30, 40 years ago. We're living in a completely different world. I actually heard this buzzword, excuse me, in a recording earlier on this week called New Earth. So we're living in a new earth. I like that. So things are different. A new earth is like a buzzword for what we're living in now. So we're living in a completely different world, technology and politically. I think politically, a lot of kids are very disenfranchised. Definitely here in South Africa. Coming from that type of background, with that type of knowledge, coming from a Pan Africanist, where do you think we should start? Or no, maybe not that. What do you think we should do having the resources that we have, like the internet and so on, and when you say in helping people, because that's something I'm very passionate about. I'm very passionate about identifying talented Black people and some form of mentorship and nurturing them, so on and so forth. That's something that's always really core of what I've been doing for the last however how long. So things like that, like here we call it cultural activism, a form of cultural activism. So things like that. Where do you think cultural activists like myself and ASAR, UncleAsar, and others, and academics and so forth can start? Because clearly the world needs some form of healing because I mean, I don't even have to explain that. I'm sure you know exactly where I'm coming from.
Oh, Wesley, I don't know. You're asking me a big question. It's a big question because I think we have so many avenues that need to be corrected. I think, again, I go back to what can we do to penetrate the core family? You see, because what has happened in my mind is that the core family values have shifted, and not even just the values, just the family itself. I mean, ASAR and I've talked about this a lot. And it's not about a two-parent family versus a one-parent family. It's what is it, is the value. And to be quite frank, I don't know how to penetrate that value. We talked about just this morning, I was at church, and the person stood up and said, he said, listen, we need some people to help put some tables up and do some things because we're hosting a big group of men next week for Father's Day. And he said, let me just say something. I noticed that whenever we ask for people to come back and help, all the adults are back helping and the children are just running around. They're not doing anything. The teenagers just standing to the side. What happened? Now, this gentleman, TK, is actually he's from Nigeria. He said, when I was growing up, it wasn't a thought. If my parents went in to help put the tables and chairs together, that is what I would do. Nobody had to tell me to come and do that. That's one thing. I'm concerned about it, but you mentioned something, and I think we have to work within the social media. Do you remember in 2008 when Obama, did he win his first term in 2008? He used the social media platform to change to attract young people. That was one of the main things. And his message was attractive, but his message was done through all their media. It was a positive message. You can do something, even if you do something little, is basically what he was saying. You can make a difference. You can't sit back and wait for government to make a difference. You make a difference. And I think if there was a way for us to use the platform in that way, we don't have, think about it, in America, and I'm just talking in America, Wesley, we don't have a Martin Luther King. We have some Al Sharpton, and I can't think of another little man's, not little man, but the man who, I'm sorry, the man.
Cornel West.
We have Cornel West, but we also have, what's the man who always helps with the lawyer? What's his name?
Oh, Benjamin Crump.
We have Benjamin Crump. But what we don't have is a leader that is helping to shape that so that we're all doing the same thing. We're all going toward the same direction. I still say that the way for us to turn things around has to be through economy. I don't care what you say. Sit-ins and boycotts worked. It will work today if we did it. If in fact you say, well, we don't like, no, that's not right. You didn't let black people are not doing this, or you're not doing right. And we say, we're not going to buy your product anymore. You will see a change. And so
they call it cancel culture now. I mean, it has this positive, they call it cancel culture now, but it has its positives and negatives. Somebody acts up, they stop doing whatever and they lose money. And they change their way.
Yeah, you eat them in the pockets. You eat them in the pockets. I agree with you there fully. That's the only way you can change. Sorry, you actually just mentioned something that I'm actually quite interested in, and I'd like to hear both your views on it. I'm very interested. I read that Cornel West is running for the US presidency, which is next year. What's your guys' take on that?
I'll let ASAR take it. I'll let him say about Cornel West.
I actually, at one point when I was between jobs, and Cornel West had published a new book, and he was at my alma mater, Texas A&M University, which is in my hometown, Bryan, Texas. And my mother went to hear him speak and get her copy of his book signed. And, Francine knows my mother through me. She's quite a character. And when she got her book signed, she told him, "Oh, I have a son in Washington, D.C. He's looking for work, blah, 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 blah." She gave him my number, and Cornel West called me at home in my apartment in D.C.
Wow.
And that's like Malcolm X calling me. I was like, wow. But I say, I don't know. I think that I'm torn because he is an inspiration for me. He's a hero for me. He's an incredible intellect. The system is. He's different than Obama, and he was one of Obama's greatest critics,
right?
And rightly so. Obama, for all intents and purposes, was allowed to be president because nothing would change, and it didn't. I don't see a Cornel West moving into a position like that. He's not going to get the votes. He's not going to get I don't think he's even going to get the funding because, as far as I'm concerned, for all intents and purposes, he's incorruptible. So he can't work within the system, as people seem to think, work within the system to change it. And the system won't allow you in it if you're a threat, it's not going to let you in it. And I think he's too much of a threat for the system to allow him in to make any measurable change. I think his work outside the system is more important than him becoming a part of the system. And the interesting thing is when he announced that, he did say, I forget the words he said, but he said that the time is now for truth and justice or something. And that for him is to run for presidency of the United States. I get it. I'm sorry?
I think I heard that.
Mm-hmm. So if any of that made any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yes, it makes sense. Well, we'll talk offline about things not changing with President Obama, because I do think that some things change.
Just from South African, from an outside perspective, I don't really understand. I know your politics, at least how it works, but I don't really know the intricate, the real nuances of US politics. But from outside, or where I'm sitting, I can't. It's like as I said, I can't see the man, getting money to do it. But it's interesting. I am following it. It'll be cool to do another episode on that, or even abroad on how Black politicians are supposedly changing. Because coming from an African, Black politicians are the same. I think as soon as you put on that suit and you go into parliament, like everything, everything changes. Like you could have said, you could have all these dreams outside. As soon as you walk in, it's gone. And I actually. Yeah, it's a touchy topic because I actually think they're actually using, at least from South Africa, they're actually using some of these leaders to not militarize, but to radicalize real issues that has real impact on real people, and they're using these puppets, and I've got a huge issue with that. We too have an election coming up next year, and it's just overwhelming. So when I saw that, I just thought that was a really interesting point. I'm sorry, guys. I just have one more point to make. Just in regards to this recording. We still have 5 or so minutes left. Should I start another session, or what do you want to do, ASAR?
How you feel?
What? Say that again. I missed that. We have what?
We have about 5 minutes of this current session running. So should I start another one after this, or do you still want to continue talking?
I think I'm talked out now. I love to talk, but because ASAR and I can talk for 4 hours at a while. But I think I'm talked out today. But I'm so energized by it and just so proud to see you two young men, African men, who are
young,
doing something. Yes, you're young. Yes, you're very young, doing something that's positive. This is what it's all about. And you asked that question, Wesley. So we have to keep doing things like this. So by ASAR doing this and inviting me, it's energizing me. It's getting me to think, what can you do? What, what can you do?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I also
Besides
believe
just doing the
that, like,
rest.
if you want to change the world, you start with one person. I feel satisfied if I did that. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you, Francine. It is a pity what
Same
happened in the
here.
first half of the recording. I'll sort it out over the week, and I'll be in touch with ASAR with that. But it was an absolute pleasure. You have quite an interesting life. We learn from as an African. I'd like to know more about the Black Panther. I'm fascinated by it. I'd like to know like what it was like, how they dress, their mannerisms and stuff like that. From what I've seen from documentaries and stuff, I'm in awe. Anyway, that's my nonsense. My brother, ASAR.
Francine, I love you. Thank
I
you.
love you too. Thank you.
And best of the best in your evolution.
Yes.
You're evolving.
Yeah.
And Wesley, don't forget, like, subscribe.
Man. Like, subscribe, and comment on this channel. I must really drill myself to say that more often. But I get so involved in the actual conversation that it always comes to me right at the end. But please like, subscribe to this channel. It's the Art Lexcia on Facebook. We've got a bunch of people who listen to us every week, maybe with more than a bunch. But my sister, it was an absolute pleasure. It's nice and cold in South Africa today, so I'm about to get warm. My king, we'll be in touch via WhatsApp, man. One love, people.
Okay. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.